Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Maura Keefe. I'm one of the scholars in residence here, and it's my privilege to moderate this conversation. I'm going to introduce our artists in alphabetical order, which worked out beautifully in your seating. Thank you. Gerald Casel, who is a stager and a dancer in the company in the past. Then Gino Grenek, who is the assistant to the artistic director. And I think you might recognize Stephen Petronio. So really what I want to talk about is just the work we've seen, because that's what it's all about, is the work. And I was talking to Ken Tabachnik, lighting designer, before the show, and I was saying how wonderful it is when the curtains open for Middlesex Gorge, and he referred to it as MSG, which I think is kind of the in-house name for it. And then it's gotten lodged in my head about thinking of MSG as a message, and I've been thinking about this work being a message from 1990. It's 35 years later, and I'm just wondering if you could say something, Stephen, about something that was so raw and immediate in the moment, and now it's a classic, and just kind of what it's like to be revisiting that fury in a different furious time.
Well, for me, that work was the work where I've always been gay. I've always been very interested in form. When I started dancing, I became very interested in form. And in that work, the sensual, sexual, animal nature of the choreography really fell into place in a way that it hadn't. It was on its way in the years before, but I began working with ACT UP during the AIDS crisis, which is the AIDS Coalition to Unleash Power. And there was a time in New York where the municipality didn't believe that there was an epidemic, and so ACT UP was very instrumental in bringing that to the forefront and then actually getting some support from the city for people who were dying. So I worked with ACT UP, and I learned civil disobedience, and we staged demonstrations, and I got arrested. And in one of those arrests, I was being carried to the paddy wagon, as they call it, and there was like 1,000 friends chanting, and I mean, there were many of us getting carried, but there were people chanting and screaming, and the policemen holding me over their head, and that moment just crystallized in my mind. And then I got thrown into what I didn't realize, a paddy wagon with no window, so it was like completely black. And that I had to go. So ACT UP was very organized, so you're in and out of prison very quickly, and you're being traced while you're in there. But the next day I had rehearsal, and I went to rehearsal, and I felt that if I couldn't do something that felt as raw and as important as that moment, then I should stop being a choreographer. So I just began to underline all the elements of my self, my whole self, pushed our pelvis forward, off our legs, and began to throw each other around with consent. And so that's where it came from. And then to restage it now, well, screw this administration and the world that we're living in. So is it pertinent now? Maybe more than ever. So I had to bring it back. I had to bring it back because it's one of my favorite works, and it's a good teaching tool for the younger dancers, but it's important.
I wanted to ask about that because Gerald and I were talking earlier this week. I've been digging into reviews and lots of things that have been written about your work over the past 40 years. And there's a piece from, I think, 1992 in the New York Times when you are, the writer is watching you coach Gerald, new dancer in the company, learning some material. And Gerald is quoted as saying, well, it feels kind of weird. And then you're quoted as saying, I advise you to do it every day because it's not going to get any easier. And so Gerald and Gino, I wonder if you could talk a little bit about, like, you came into it when nobody knew what was going on. These dancers have their eyes wide open when they're stepping into it. But could you talk a little bit about what it was like to be in it when it's being invented and now staging it and coaching the dancers?
Yeah, thank you. So I started doing MSG in 1991, and we performed it the most, I think, out of all the pieces, maybe almost 8 years or something like that. And I learned it straight from Jeremy Nelson, who's an amazing person, dancer, original cast member. And it's the hardest, most satisfying piece to perform because you have to really be in tune with, not just with your own body, but with everybody else and all of the cues and all of the haze and the lighting, which is really difficult to dance in. But it's also touching into the erotic. And I think about Audre Lorde's, the uses of the erotic when I was restaging this piece, to bring it to a level of touch and consent and how there's power when you allow someone to touch you and manipulate you. And also thinking about queerness in the work and how orientation in space can be queered. And when you allow someone to move you, as we always do, shift the shape or manipulating a body part, that is also powerful when you allow that to happen.
I joined the company in 1999 and was with the company for 17 years. And I always say that in those 17 years, I never missed a rehearsal. I never missed a show. The work was that important to me, and you had to be in the room to understand it. And MSG first came into my life, I think, in 2005 when we were restaging. And so I'd been in the company 5 or 6 years at that point. Stephen was still dancing in the work. And so we call it the flower pan solo and the flower pan duet. So Stephen was still doing the solo. I first covered him in the solo and had the privilege of dancing the duet with him. And so then a few years later, when the piece came back into the rep again, Stephen very graciously let me do the flower pants solo and then the duet, and then I've restaged it multiple times. I will say the work has lived in me for 20 years. It will never leave me, especially that material, but it never was easy, and it will never be easy. But it's also, I said recently to someone, I said, that solo is about a minute, and the duet is about a minute. So if you're doing those roles, you are on stage for 2 minutes in the whole context of the piece. But in those 2 minutes, you get to become a rock star. You hear that music, you put on that costume, and you step out onto that stage, and in that minute, you are a rock star. And then at the end, I go home and wash dishes. So but you get to live in that moment so fully, and it's pretty amazing.
Stephen, do you want to say anything about H. Petal, who designed the costumes for...
Okay, everybody knows at this point that H. Petal is me.
Costume design for Middlesex Gorge, and I have
many other dancers.
Yes, yeah. I think it's also the costume designer for your the newest piece on the program. I just want to say, because it became kind of a signature look, or a signature kind of visual element for the company, thinking about the dancers in the corsets. And why alternate identity? Why reveal now?
Well, when I was making the costumes, in New York in those days, you couldn't be serious at more than one thing. You weren't allowed to, and so if you were a good serious choreographer, they wouldn't take your design seriously, and if you were a musician, they wouldn't take your choreography. That was a moment in time. So I just didn't want. First of all, I didn't want to get blamed for those corsets, and I didn't really even think about it. I saw them in an orthopedic shop on St. Mark's Place, and so I said, I'm going to use those, and I took them, put them on upside down and backwards on the dancers. I dyed them, and I actually safety pinned the flowers to the tights the night before the show because I didn't know how to sew, and they got sewn like a year later in Brazil somewhere by a proper costume person. But I just thought, it's over, let it out.
So I want to talk about the newest work that we see, the company dance, and then we'll talk about your solo, because I think it's a really interesting contrast to see American landscapes on this program. Because if everything is sort of present in the dancing bodies in the Fury in Middlesex Gorge, by American landscapes, you've made a choice in collaborating with Robert Longo, the visual artist, to make the specificity of narrative possibility clearer. Could you talk a little bit about why to make it explicit and instead of implicit? And I'm also thinking, I'm going to pile this question in there too. I'm thinking about the use of the flags.
Sure. Well, Robert Longo is a contemporary of mine. His work is the first piece of art I ever bought. I was a poor-ass dancer, and he made a poster for the Kitchen, which is a space in New York, and it was $50, and it was signed, and I bought it, and so I still have it hanging on my wall. But my board chair, Jill Brienza, reconnected me with Robert, and she curated that with me. He gave us a series of images, and we made a story that we felt was a story that needed to be told visually. By the way, all of those images are charcoal drawings that are on a huge scale that got photographed, and that's what Robert does. I love his work. I love how he makes a picture, and the image becomes operatic, whether it's a flag or a bullet hole or whatever. And my work, it's a journal of the moment we're living in terms of the sense of it. It's not narrative work, but I thought it was really important. It was the second, after the first round of this administration, and I felt it was a moment to have a look at what's happening. So if you think about the landscapes, it starts in a very pastoral way, and it goes through a very political moment, and then it becomes environmental. There's and this is really always very touching to me. There's a rose that turns into a burnt forest, and it's a picture of what we're going through right now. We did not have so many fires back in 2019, and the horrible thing about that work is that it's more relevant today than it was back then. The flags, I put them in for these shows, and they're all gender-oriented flags, and I just felt it was the moment. It had to be done, and so we did it.
Here's the thing that I also love about that, because in addition to the Yvonne Rainer piece we saw today, in the Bloodlines project, you also did Trio A with flags, which has the dancers with American flags. And there's an iconic photograph of Steve Paxton and Yvonne Rainer performing nude with American flags. So I feel like there's a kind of reckoning to the past by having the American flag first.
Yeah, there is a lineage. And so we bring the American flag out. Well, it was a process. I thought, we wanted something very American, and we started with denim, and then that didn't really read as anything. And we had just done the Trio A with flags, so I thought it's got to be. And there are American flags in the drawing, so I thought it must be an American flag.
So I'm wondering, for you two sitting in the house this week, what roles you want to dance in American landscapes, or get back into Broken Man? What kinds of things are your kinesthetic empathies firing and speaking to you?
I was the Bud duet with the half jackets. I was one of the original. I cry all the time, but I was one of the original cast members of that. It was made on me, and so that work lives in my heart very deeply. I still like to get my legs high in the air, so that is always enjoyable. But MSG, I mean, like putting on that costume and the flower pants and that material, like when we went back into the studio to teach this current group of dancers, we needed about 2 seconds and it was back in our bodies, like it was back in both of our bodies, and we like to argue about it sometimes, but that's part of the process. And but yeah, it's just, and someone said to me recently that's coming to the shows, a former company member said, you better be dancing. And I was like, I'm not dancing on stage, but my heart is dancing with every single step that the dancers do. So yeah.
Gino, you make me cry. I would say, yeah, Middlesex Gorge for sure. But I'm also missing Lorraine and The Rite of Spring. There's some really amazing work that we've done over the years that I've taught recently, actually taught some material from Rite of Spring, and it's so, we were talking about this earlier, how prescient this work is and how relevant it feels right now. Like the whole program is asking what it means to be an American in a catharsis, during a catharsis, where MSG, the body is a catharsis in American landscape. The culture, all of us are going through something. So I think it would feel good to do some of that as someone who's restaging.
I also think I think for a lot of us, it's like we've seen these pieces or some of the pieces that Gerald just mentioned. And when we see those, we see these dancers doing it, but we also have the memory of so many people that have passed through the company in those roles. So like we bring that to the table with us when we're watching the work, and it's quite magical.
So I was thinking of a comment Merce Cunningham made to me in this theater when he said that he knew that he had done a good job when some people walked out in the middle of the show. And
Did anyone walk out tonight?
yes, congratulations.
Thank you so much.
A couple of people.
Forgiven. You're pardoned.
So I was thinking about we talked a little bit about the explicit nature of the images, but then in your talking solo, the newest work on the program, you are frank and forward as your dances have always been, but now you're using language. Could you just talk a little bit about your continuing radicalism?
Well, I don't think of it as continual. I mean, I don't think of it as radical. I think I'm very open, and I always have been. And when I realized that I could speak up, I started speaking up. So in the 90s, I mean, my career shot very fast in the 90s. And when I was part of ACT UP, I realized that, oh, I'm getting a lot of press. I could actually talk about what my life is. You could talk about the, and I love, believe me, I love my work, and I love I really believe in the technique and the craft of it, but I felt that I could talk about my sexuality and what was going on politically in New York and in America during that crisis, and that was a platform that is rare. So I spoke a lot about my sexuality in every interview, which is why my father was like, why do you got to talk about that all the time? He actually used to cut those parts out of the Times reviews and like re-Xerox it. Rest his soul. But it just felt like it was, I could. And, you know, maybe some people didn't like it. A lot of people didn't like it, and a lot of people did. And it's just, you know, look, I knew very early on that not everybody was going to go for what I was doing. It's complicated, it's a lot of different things. And so those who can go for it can go for it, and those who can't. But I will say what I want.
Excellent. And you're going to continue to with Petronio projects, as Kim Chan mentioned at the top of the show. And I'm excited to see these works danced by other companies. I'm excited for things that feel like they're from right now, continuing to be classics. And thank you for curating such a beautiful program and making such beautiful dances for us. Thanks for joining us.
So my pleasure. Thank you so much.